Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us once more. Our next speaker is one of our teammates at Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center. On a regular day, she's actually our training coordinator. You might have seen her in some assist trainings or grief talks. I know her very personally because of her pumpkin mochi crunch, which she still owes me very soon. I'll be asking her for that. But today she'll be talking about her personal experience with grief and how she has helped a lot of people and continue to help so many more about dealing with grief. So, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Michelle Sasimoto.
Half a day, everybody. This is amazing. There's like 123 people logged on to the virtual platform. I am so privileged and honored to be sharing with you today some information that I have been sharing actually for the past 6 years. So welcome to Workplace Wellness. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of grief in the workplace. And before that, I just want to introduce to you a little bit by telling you a backstory if you don't know me. So again, my name is Michelle Sasimoto. I wear many hats in the community. I work for the behavioral health full-time as the training officer, came from the prevention and training branch. I also am a mother. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a not a brother. I am a friend, and I'm so many other things. But today I'm gonna just take all of those hats off and put it on my table at the moment. And I'm just gonna keep my human hat on. And I'm gonna ask that everybody do that. So grief in the workplace, what does that mean? I'm certain that many of us have experienced some really hard life experiences, some losses in life. Actually, today is October 1st. And this morning I woke up, and we call it in grief recovery, a grief attack. And I woke up with a very heavy heart. I woke up with a welt in my throat because I knew that it was October, and it reminds me that it was the month 9 years ago when my husband passed away. Mind you, I was married for 10 years and I was with the same man for 14 years who blessed me with a beautiful daughter. And at the time when he died 9 years ago, my life was in disarray. The moment it was like he was here, and then the next moment he wasn't here. So not only did I realize that I lost my husband, I realized that I lost a father. I also realized that I lost dual income. I realized that I lost my safety and security. I realized that I lost my identity as a wife. And most importantly, I realized that I lost my best friend. And thankfully, grief in the workplace at that time for me was manageable. And I felt so supported because I worked with the best team. I had the most supportive supervisor and I had the most supportive coworkers. And one of the things that they allowed me, and I'll never forget this, one of the things that they allowed me was they allowed me to feel my human emotions. They allowed me to feel my devastation and my sadness and my confusion and my uncertainty, and also my unwillingness to return back to the workplace right after the set amount of days for bereavement, right? How our employers, some of our employers were fortunate enough to have a few days or few weeks off with administrative leave so that we can bereave our loved ones. You know, typically that's usually done for planning the funeral services and having the funeral services. But what happens is the emotional impact still continues on. And believe it or not, it took me almost 4 months to come back to work. And even when I returned to work after all those months, I still had those moments where I would have grief attacks. I would be sitting in my office and I would look at his picture or read something that maybe he had given me and I kept, and I would just cry, and it was inconsolable. Nobody could stop me from crying. There are days where I remember where I ran away from work, and it wasn't because I, didn't want to be an ethical employee. It wasn't because I didn't feel like I wanted to be at my work, because I did. I wanted to be at work so that I could forget about the emotional state of mind that I was in. But I would run away from work. And I remember this one time, and for those of you who are listening, that if you were there, you know who you are. I left work because I was just so in my feelings. And at that time, I used to go to the cemetery a lot, and I would just sit there because it was a place for me to reflect, and I could cry my ugly cry, and nobody was there because nobody could see me, right? Everybody else was passed on. So they were all in their graves, and I felt like it was a safe space. And I remember calling several of my coworkers, to include Debs, you're on this platform right now. And I remember telling them that I just didn't know what was going on. I felt like I was going crazy. I thought I was okay. And I told them that I was a hot mess and I was crying, and I don't know what to do. And I'll tell you what, about 10 minutes later, my coworkers pull up to the cemetery to offer me support. And they just sat with me and they cried with me and they just let me be. And so today I want to talk to you a little bit about the impact of grief and what that's like, even when we feel that we're doing okay and we return back to the workplace, the workforce, and how we, if we are going through grief, what we can do to also ask for the help and support that we need. And most importantly, if you're a coworker, what you could do to help. And if you are a manager or leader, what your whole organization can do to help people who are grieving. My heart was broken at that time, so my head couldn't work. I'm a trainer by profession, and it took me some time, even after that, to be able to be in the capacity of a trainer, because I remember going back and it was too premature. And it was then that at this training, when I was supposed to be the person that was providing safety and also content to deliver content, I was kind of like the person that was grieving, and I needed the help and support. And I knew that that was compromising the quality of my work. So I was very mindful of that. Couple of disclaimers. I'm going to share my screen now. Are you going to allow me screen sharing capability? Oh, there you go. I'm so glad that we have professionals on the other side to handle this, because if this was left up to me, we will have a lot of technical difficulties. So I appreciate the team behind the scenes. Thank you so much. I'm an advanced grief recovery specialist. So a little disclaimer, I am not a counselor, a therapist, or a licensed clinician. Many times people refer to me as a grief counselor. I am not a grief counselor. I am, however, a certified grief recovery specialist, trained and certified by the Grief Recovery Institute, which this program is the only evidence-based program that deals with grief recovery. So a couple of commitments just to ensure we have a safe environment and that you maximize your time and information that you are taking away from today's presentation. I'd like to ask everybody to keep an open mind. And there's going to be a lot of things that's going to challenge your belief system. There's going to be things that I may say that it may resonate with you, and maybe you'll be like, what is she talking about? But I'm going to ask along with that is to not judge. I ask that you kindly not judge me and not judge yourselves as well if you're having these normal and natural emotional reactions to anything that I am saying. And another thing too is about no comparing loss, because comparison robs us of joy. And when we compare our losses, what it does is it minimizes the value of our own experience, right? And sometimes it's easy for us to say, well, you know what, my life is not so bad anymore because someone else's life is a little worse than mine, right? And then it kind of makes us feel like we're okay, but what does that do for the other person? So even at times like that, when we feel like we want to compare our losses, every grief and every loss is very unique. It's as unique as our thumbprints. So there's no loss or experience that is going to be exactly the same. And no apologizing for human emotions. You guys may see me cry today, you may see me laugh. And if you feel compelled to do any of those things, please don't apologize for it and go ahead and and be who you are in your most authentic and raw self for the next 30 minutes. Before we talk any further, I want to just drop a couple of the grief recovery methods definition of grief, right? So first of all, just by definition in the dictionary, if you were to look up grief, the definition would be the normal and natural response to a loss of any kind. However, at such a young age, we were already taught how to not act normal and natural about losses that we experience. Let me ask you this question. Do you remember when you were a kid and your lollipop fell down and how devastated you felt? And you started to cry because your lollipop fell down and you lost that. It was something that was precious to you at the moment. What kind of comments perhaps did the adult offer to you? They probably said something like, don't worry, stop crying. My gosh, you're being so silly. It's just a lollipop. Let's get you a new lollipop, right? So if that resonates with you, that's definitely how I remember it. So therefore, it's telling me that what I was feeling was wrong and it was not natural. Hence why a lot of grievers will isolate themselves when they're going through experiences like this. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end or change in a familiar pattern or behavior. When my husband passed away 9 years ago, so because of my belief system, and many people told me, Michelle, he's in a better place, right? But my conflicting feeling was, okay, so he's in a better place and maybe he's not suffering. I don't know that. But the best place that my husband needed to be was here with me right now. So I was very conflicted at the fact that, was I feeling selfish that I wanted him to be here physically with me, or should I be at peace that he was somewhere else in a better place? Okay. And the third definition is something that maybe some of us can really connect with. Grief is the feeling of reaching out for someone who has always or never been there, only to discover that when we need them one last time, they are no longer there. Okay. And also, if you're reaching out for someone who was never there in your life, you know, maybe an estranged parent or relationship, somebody that you knew, but you have an estranged relationship, and you're reaching out for them once again, but they are still not there. So grief is more than just death of a loved one. It's more than divorce. Here are some, and by research from the Grief Recovery Institute, there are over 43 loss events that actually are connected with grief. There could be more now. And these are just some of them. So there's like the tangible ones, like divorce, death, relationship breakups. And when I say relationship breakups, it is not just romantic relationships. It could even be relationships in families, relationships with your friends, relationships with coworkers. Loss of a career, we've seen a surge in that, right? In the past 2 years with the pandemic. So with finances, even loss of health, especially in today, everything is okay. And the next thing you know, you have the cold and the sniffles and you go get a COVID test and all of a sudden you're positive, right? They give you your positive results. That's loss of health. Moving, retirement, marriage, pregnancy. We move over to the other side. It's more of the intangible losses, things like this. And this might be sounding more familiar to you because it's very familiar to me in these last few years with the pandemic again. They're like emerging losses. So loss of safety, loss of security. Have we been feeling that these past 2 years? Loss of identity, right? Loss of trust. Many people, they have loss of trust in the government, in leadership, in our doctors, just all kinds of different things. Loss of trust, loss of control, loss of freedom to choose. That's kind of like at the surface right now, where many people are feeling so conflicted about wearing a mask to protect themselves and not wearing a mask. So we don't have the freedom anymore to choose what we don't want to do because it's pretty much imposed on us because it's, of course, for the majority, the better thing to do. Change in social activities. How many of us are affected by this? We are living and breathing this every single day. You know, we look forward to those Fridays when we get the new joint information releases, right? Or the executive orders. And we're hopeful that things are going to change. There's going to be lifts on the bans. We're going to have social gatherings, right? How many of you were in a place in the last several months where maybe you had planned a wedding? Maybe you had planned a birthday party for your 1-year-old child, your first child that you were looking forward to. And then all of a sudden, the executive order comes through and now we can no longer have that, right? Loss of freedom, loss of trust, loss in our our social activities, change in working hours, change in working conditions, teleworking, coming to work, and now change in school, right? Our kids are so confused about what's happening. It's like their cycle, their sleep cycle, their whole routine cycle is just derailed. But so as the parents and the adults also in these children's lives. So grief is definitely something that is around us all the time. And it's not a new word because it has been talked about for centuries and centuries, right? So I'm going to move on now to the BS on grief. And, you know, again, here, this is where when I first heard about these things, I was like, whoa, these are so true. And this is all I ever knew growing up. And the BS on grief, if anybody could take a guess what that is, you're absolutely right. The belief system on grief. So one of the first things that I grew up believing was when something bad happened to me, something sad, when I lost something, when my boyfriend rejected me and broke up with me, or maybe I didn't get accepted to the college that I applied for, or maybe I didn't get hired for the job that I really wanted. Instead of being able to relieve some of those the emotional charge that was happening in me, I was told to not feel bad, right? I was told to not feel bad when my husband passed away because he was in a better place. I was told to not feel bad because I'm young and soon enough, I'm going to be able to find another husband that was going to be able to take care of me. But although maybe, you know, that could be half right, my heart felt like it was shattered in a million pieces. And how was I not supposed to feel bad about that? So what does that make me do? It makes me put on a mask every single day, and it makes me walk out showing people that I am the perfect person and that there is no care in the world, and I am able to survive this whole mess that I'm in by myself. Because the next part of the BS is grieving alone. And again, we're told, I was told this at such a young age. If I cried, my mom or dad would tell me, you know, if you're going to cry, go into your room and cry. What did that tell me? First of all, it told me that you didn't really care about how I was feeling. Secondly, it told me that crying was bad, that crying was uncomfortable. So what happens is now grievers, when people are going through a very difficult time, they tend to isolate, right? That's why one of the indications when a person, if we want to check in with someone who might be having thoughts of suicide, is to see if they're withdrawing, if they're isolating. And grievers will isolate from two important things. They will isolate from the people that they love, and they will isolate from the things or the hobbies that they love doing. So we're told to grieve alone. And I did that for years. I grieved alone. I went out there because I didn't feel bad, and I put on this mask and I put on my superhero powers. But when the end of the day came and it was time for me to be alone again in my room in the darkness, I couldn't even show that to my daughter because of people telling me not to feel bad. Then they told me to replace the loss. That was another belief system that I was handed and taught. They said, replace the loss, right? So what do? Ever have a pet when you were a kid and the pet passed away? You probably bought a new goldfish if your goldfish died, right? Try having a puppy. And then, you know, if you're a parent, you might understand this. If your child's pet dies, it's very easy for us to go and try to replace the loss by going to the pet shop and trying to find a puppy that looks exactly like the puppy we just lost. But you know, the real sad part of all of this is that we can't replace living beings. We can't replace people that are living or things that are living, right? One of the things that I tried was I tried to replace the loss of my husband with relationships. And I didn't even wait for the magic number of 1 year before my husband passed away. After 10 months, I got into a romantic relationship, not because I wanted to go out there and put myself out there, or not because I just felt desperate, but all I knew was how to be a wife. And all I wanted was to be a wife again. And I wanted to have a father for my child. So replacing the loss just felt like a natural thing to do. One of the things that was always offered to me was be strong. And I remember when my husband passed away, we were both 37 years old. My daughter was 11. And they would tell me things like, Michelle, you have to be strong. You have to be strong for your daughter because she really needs you. She's young. And I was like, okay, I get it. I understand. Being strong is important, and I want to be the best parent. And I thought that being strong meant that I was going to be the best parent. So what did that do for me? I was strong and I was confused. And I was like, I don't understand. They're telling me to be strong, but being strong to me meant getting out of bed every single day, at least once a day. Being strong meant brushing my teeth. Being strong meant going to check in on my daughter every now and then, because I didn't have the capacity. I didn't know what was being strong, what I had to do to be strong. Another thing was keep busy. When I got back into the swing of things and I went back to work, I did that. All I did was I just engaged myself in all of my work activities. I signed up for all the weekend presentations and outreaches. I did all the trainings. And then if I wasn't working, I was busy with everything and all the activities that my daughter was engaged in as well. And what happened at the end of the day, I was exhausted and my heart was still broken. And one of the last BS on grief is time heals. Maybe you have heard this. Time heals all wounds. And they tell you, just give it time. This too shall pass. You know, you've been through something similar to this before, and you're going to rise above this and everything's going to be fine. And you know what? I waited and waited and waited. And nothing was happening because I was doing everything else. I was keeping busy. I was being strong. I was replacing the loss. Then I went home and I cried all by myself in my room. And I really tried not to feel bad. And 9 years later, as I sit here, still with emotions that are so present, that are so raw, like it just happened yesterday, even if I feel better and I do have a lot of joy in my life because of my healing and recovery journey, the wound does not go away, and it may heal, but time with correct action steps, it's what's going to get us through. So that's what I'm really hopeful about this whole presentation moving forward. So these are some of the BS that we have been taught, and again, to no fault of the people who taught us, to our parents, to our great-grandparents, our grandparents, maybe just people around us that, again, have well intentions, but are ill-informed in how to really approach grief and handle grief situations. So what do we do when the BS is not good enough for us anymore? What do we do when grieving alone is just not doable? What do we do when being strong is not, I can't do it anymore because I got to take this mask off because it's suffocating? And how am I supposed to be able to move through with my life if that's not working anymore? So what do we do to engage, to avoid, to ease or mask our emotional pain? We call it in the Grief Recovery Institute and Method, STIRBs, which stands for short-term energy relieving behaviors. It's kind of like external outlets that we look at. Again, just to try to do one of the three things, right? To avoid, to ease, or to mask emotional pain. And you know, Jesse, he talked about this in the previous workshop that he just did about food and nutrition. Alcohol and other drugs, right? That's one of them. He talked a lot about foods. And as he was speaking, I was thinking, you know, that is so true, because the root causes of why our lifestyle is the way it is when it comes to food is how that relationship with food has a lot to do with our life experiences around loss, right? So alcohol and other drugs, what does that do? It makes us feel a little better because first of all, we're taught to grieve alone. But you know, if you try to drink some alcohol, it's known as the truth serum. So when you go to a bar and you're sitting there grieving alone and you're having a couple of drinks, next thing you know, you release your inhibitions and now you feel a little bit more courageous to start speaking your truth. And that's why bartenders are usually a resource for grievers, because bartenders will just be there to listen to all of your stories and just continue to pour your drinks, right? Other drugs, it doesn't even have to be illicit drugs. It could also be prescription medication, eating and foods, right? When I looked at this, and I have struggled with my weight for a very long time, and I realized as I did my relationship graph with food, I realized that every time I gained weight, it was because something happened to me in my life, because something devastating, there was a heartbreak. I'm not the kind of person that when I'm stressed out or when I have a heartbreak, I lose weight. I actually gain a lot of weight. So if I'm gaining weight, it's your indication to check in with me and see how I'm doing. Because at 3 a.m, when that person who just told me they don't want to be with me anymore is not there for me, guess what? Chocolate is there for me. Ice cream is just a few feet in my freezer waiting for me to eat it because ice cream makes everything better, right? That's why we call it comfort food. And when we take a look at our lifestyles, especially here on the island, and we look at the health conditions that are attached to it, and we look at, you know, how people's relationships with foods are, I'm going to tell you something. We go back and we look and we try to address that. It's going to probably start from when they had a loss experience in their life, right? Smoking is another thing, because a lot of times my smoker friends that I know are family members, they tell me that smoking kind of like relieves stress. It makes them momentarily feel at peace. Sleeping. Sometimes we sleep too much. Sometimes we sleep too little. Sometimes we don't sleep any at all. So sleeping is another way that we just will escape and we'll forget our problems and our emotional journey. Exercising. How many of you, when you're going through something very devastating, you go to the gym more than ever, right? You exercise, you're doing a lot of these different things. Shopping, retail therapy, as it's fondly referred to, because we're emotional shoppers. And when we are heightened with emotions, we purchase. That's when all the stores and all of the retail shops really like it. It's when people are going through emotional situations in their life because they drop a lot of cash. I was one of them. Shopping was one of my stirs. I replaced the loss. I replaced the furniture. I went to buy new furniture. I bought a new car. I was shopping every single weekend with my daughter, eating out, because I didn't want to come home to grieve alone again and eat at my dining table. That reminded me so much of my husband and the loss and the pain that I was experiencing. Social media, this is something that, has really become so popular in the last several years. If you guys want to know if anybody is having some difficulties in life and they're going through a loss event, just read their statuses on Facebook, read what they're posting on Instagram, or watch their TikTok videos. A lot of times, which I think is great, I believe that it's definitely a blessing in disguise for social media, because it allows me as a person who knows how to help people that are grieving. It allows me to reach out to individuals and use that now as a helpful platform to be able to reach out to people and help them get the help that's needed. Sex is another one. Again, about relationships and gaming. So these are just some things, and I'm not saying that they're bad. Please don't get me wrong. These are all things that we could do, again, with moderation if you're doing it. But when you see that there's a surge in any of these things, or this is all that you're doing so that you don't have to feel the emotional pain, then that's an indication that you may need to actually get some additional help and supports. So the hidden cost of grief, when we take a look at the hidden cost of grief in the workplace. So the Grief Recovery Institute in 2003 did a study. They conducted a study, and they found out that the financial impact for the hidden cost of grief in the workplace was just really, really dumbfounding. And what that means is, when they did the research, it was calculated to be over $75 billion in loss of productivity. And I was like, wow, how is that? And when you take a look at everything that's on the screen right now, and you do the calculations for that, $75 billion is attributed to loss of productivity in the workplace. The research is being updated right now, but there's already a projection that by now, since 2003, there's already over $100 billion that are lost in trying to take a look at all of the hidden costs of grief. Absenteeism, right? When our hearts are broken, our heads don't work, our spirits are down, who wants to go to work? Who wants to go to work when there's a death in their family? Who wants to go to work when they're having fights with their spouse, right? Who wants to go to work when they're so scared and fearful about the pandemic that's taking place right now? So absenteeism will increase whenever an individual is experiencing grief. Occupational injury and workers' comp. Again, when our heart is broken, our head doesn't work, the concentration level starts to get really distorted. We're accident prone. When I was really heavy in the grief several years ago, I couldn't remember. I would be driving and I'm supposed to go somewhere, and next thing you know, I pass the turn and I'm like, okay, what am I doing? Where am I at? It's like I have momentary, like I just go on vacations in my head and I don't even know where I'm at. Another thing too that I did for a long time, and ask my coworkers, they laugh at this all the time, I always forget where I park. And that's why I always try to park in the same place, but I forget where I park. And thank goodness for the alarms on your car, because you can click that button and then you'll be able to find your vehicle. But there's so many different things that take place, right? Accidents, employee turnover, diminished productivity, poor decision-making, reduced ability to concentrate, poor interaction with coworkers, erratic behaviors with employees, and workplace violence, right? So there may be a time where maybe, you guys are doing the usual lunch break connection and everybody's telling jokes. And next thing you know, somebody says something that would typically be said when you're in this lunchroom, and one of your coworker takes major offense to it. And then maybe like slams the table, and then it erupts in workplace violence, right? What is going on? There's something that has changed in that person. There may have been a change in a pattern of behavior. There may be the person wanting to reach out for someone who was always there, but is not there anymore. So when we look at hidden costs of grief, the question lies in, wow, that's a lot of money. And I've learned also that when we try to replace employees, it costs about an average, probably more now, because this was like 20 years ago. But it takes about $10,000 to train a new employee that's coming on board. Because if we have to let an employee go because of all of the different things that are happening here, and usually this is where the judgment takes place, right? So I want to move forward because there is a light at the end of the tunnel to all of this. And what could we do? How could we help? Oh my goodness. I am so not sure, guys, why my other slides are not showing, but I'm going to talk through this. So one of the things we could do to start with is starting with ourselves, right? Because we can't help other people if we don't first help ourselves. And it's kind of like the analogy when you're riding in the airplane. And if you ever listen, first of all, to the safety instructions that comes on right when you board the airplane, it tells you, please pay attention, right? One of the things I always listen to is the part where it says, when your oxygen mask comes down, and if you have a small child or somebody that needs help, they tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put the oxygen mask on the other person. Why? Because if you don't and you try to put it on the other person, you're not going to have oxygen, so you may not be able to save yourself and the other person, okay? And a lot of times, when we're thinking about this in real life, many times we try to put the oxygen mask on other people before we put the oxygen mask on ourselves. And that is sometimes, most of the time, I'm going to say, very unhealthy. So first of all, practice self-compassion. Forgiving ourselves is one of the things. And if we are the ones that are grieving, sometimes we are going to hold those rocks in our backpack, which is the loss. And we are going to think that, I feel so responsible because I'm going to be out of work and I'm going to leave all my coworkers with this workload. So therefore, I'm just going to take a short time and then I'm going to return to work and I'm going to go ahead and give it my all. But you know what? You're shortchanging yourself, first of all, because you know that maybe you don't have the capacity to do that yet. And also, you could also be compromising the quality at the workplace because of everything that this hidden cost of grief, it might surface over time. Another thing is give yourself permission to feel, right? So if again, you're thinking that you have to be strong for your coworkers in the workplace, I'll tell you this right now, they got your back. They're going to have a contingency plan. And when you're not there, they're going to take care of things that you're leaving for them. And I promise you, when you get back, when you're ready to do so, guess what's going to happen? The work is still going to be there for you, okay? But this is what happens in the workplace. There's mitigation plans and there's ways that we could support. Another thing is taking care of your heart, your mind, and your body. It's very easy for us when we are going through a loss experience to forget about taking care of us because we want to take care of all the other people that are impacted. As a mom, I wanted to stop taking care of me because I felt that I needed to take care of my daughter. She was the only person that I needed to take care of. And what I found out was that if I wasn't getting sleep, I wasn't going to be a good mom to my child because I was angry, I was irritable. If I wasn't eating, if I wasn't exercising, I'm just going to be a very unhealthy and unhappy mom, and I'm not going to be able to be there to provide support the way she needs it. Another one is to ask for help. When you feel that you've just had it and you're at wit's end and you feel so overwhelmed with so many different emotions that are overflowing and you don't know how to make any sense of it, one of the things that's real important is to ask for help. Whether it's going to be reaching out to your coworkers, to your bosses, maybe to your family members, or maybe to the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, or maybe to a grief recovery specialist, or maybe even to your pastors or your priest or somebody within your church organization, to be able to ask for help. Because it's one thing, again, especially with, I'm certain that 130 of us that's on this platform, we are all service providers, right? So we're so used to being the ones that help other people. And it's okay to give grace to yourself to ask for that help as well. The next one that I want to talk about is support in the workplace. So how do we do this? Coworkers, how are we going to be able to help other people, management and leadership? One of the things that we could start with first is, we know that the elephant exists in the room. If somebody is going through some hardships because of a loss, right? It would be so ridiculous if I returned back to work and everybody knew that my husband died, but they just didn't talk to me about it because everyone knew that my husband died. But to try to play like they don't know just to avoid it because it's uncomfortable to talk about, that wouldn't have been helpful for me as a griever. What would have been helpful is that if they would tell me, I'm so glad you're back. I just want you to know, that we were devastated when you were gone and we really missed you, but I'm here to support you. And if you need some time, if you just need to take a moment every now and then, all you have to do is be honest with us and let us know. Okay, that's a lot better than trying to assume responsibilities and then feeling like there's burden being placed and given to one another, right? When the workload is just insurmountable and we can't really control that. Another one is provide a safe space for grieving employees. And the behavioral health really does a great job with this. So if we know of somebody in our circle that is going through a loss and a grief and it has impacted us, we're really wonderful to come together to be able to talk about that and brief about it, and also just see how we can support the griever. Okay, so now if the griever comes back to work, what could we do as managers and leaders and coworkers? First of all, again, is to allow a safe space that they can be as human as possible. And I know sometimes it's conflicting and contradicting to the normal belief, right? Because they say, be professional in your workplace and detach the emotions. But I'll tell you what, it's really difficult. It's very, very difficult to detach your emotions when you're in your workplace, because we spend a lot of our time in the workplace, and also the people that we work with become our extended families. Okay. Another thing is to provide additional breaks. So the great thing about it is a lot of companies, they offer the bereavement administrative leave, right? They also are very accommodating. When my husband passed away, my supervisor basically was there to support and said, take the time that you need, take the leave that you need. If you have the leave, your personal leave, your sick leave, whatever you need to do, and let us know if we need to support you in other ways. Okay. Again, it's going to be more helpful because if we make the griever prematurely come back to work, again, there could be some other underlying issues that will still arise, and it could really impact everybody else in the workplace. Another one is, if operationally available or able, provide more time off, right? Like what I mentioned. Encourage and promote self-care. One of the things that the government has done for the last 3 years is their worksite wellness program. I love this because it really helps me. I'm a busy single mom. So trying to just chalk in time to go exercise in a day is already difficult as it is. To try to manage my whole day with being at work, being a grief recovery specialist, later on, taking care of my child, my mom who's 80 years old, and my church, and it can go on and on and on. So having this worksite wellness program is really important to me. I value it because it allows me 1 hour, or not 1 hour, it allows me 3 hours a week to be able to get my exercise on. So that's something that companies can also offer. Take a look at what your worksite wellness plan is and enhance it, right? Promote it, talk about it, because some of it exists, but many times people are not really using it and maximizing the benefits of it. And if you have smaller companies and you don't have one, sit down and talk to the people that do have it and plan a worksite wellness program. Because many times the employee assistance program is what happens in the mitigation side, right? It takes maybe a coworker being outed that they are having trouble with drugs and alcohol, or maybe there's some kind of display of erratic behavior in the workplace or workplace violence. And then that's when the referral gets given over to the employee assistance program. Worksite wellness just is the preventative side of all of that, okay? So moving on now, be cognizant of erratic behaviors. Coworkers, when you see people like this, if, you know, we know the people we work with, we know their patterns, we know their laughs, we know what they're gonna say. Sometimes we actually repeat their repeated stories and sentences because that's how much we know them. We are also gonna know when their behaviors change, when their behaviors become erratic, right? And I really truly believe as a caring and supportive coworker, it's my due diligence to nudge that person and do a check-in with them to see what's going on. And if I feel like they're making it unsafe for the workplace, or that they could be unsafe to themselves, I will then take charge to refer to my immediate supervisor so that we can know that there's support for this employee that may need it, and also the employee feels like they're supported, okay? And lastly, it's identify changes in the performance, right? And again, it's not waiting into the performance evaluation once a year, okay? That performance evaluation, to me, when I'm gonna do it with my staff, it's an indication of how their year went. And it's not just so that I can approve an increment for them, or it's not just so that I could retain them and not, you know, recommend termination or anything like that. But it's also a check-in because their productivity level is an indication of how sound their mind and their hearts are as well. So all of these different tips, it seems like a lot, but it's very doable in the workplace. And if you haven't talked about it yet, it's time to start thinking about it, especially with all of the changes that are happening so frequently. The grief definition right now that we're using is the conflicting feelings of a change or an end of a pattern or behavior, because every single day there's anticipated expected change because of the whole pandemic, okay? So I wanna go into some resources that you could also offer and have this in all of your workstations, because it's very important to have this. First of all, it's the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and that is 1-800-273-TALK. And the great thing about this is that Guam is actually part of the whole crisis center network nationally. So if you were to call that 800 number, they will connect you with resources on the island. So it's going to be like a full circle back to resources here on Guam. But it's an additional number for you to call that somebody will be able to monitor 24 hours, 7 days a week. And they are also trained to speak to people one-on-one. Another one is our own local hotline number, which is the 647-8833 or 34. Again, we have some amazing trained individuals that are on standby just to talk to you, you know, to help you with questions that you have regarding COVID, to help you with questions that you're having about your child who may be acting out, or maybe just because you're just feeling really sad because we're moving into the holiday season. So any of those reasons is definitely fitting to call and use that number. And another one is the Togi Warm Line. And these are recovery specialists. So if, you know, people are going through recovery with drugs and alcohol, this is another wonderful resource. And the Togi Warm Line is basically, I have that here because I didn't save it, guys. When you make changes to your slides, it gets a little difficult when you do not put it there, but Debbie sent that to me. It's right here. It is 989-6687, okay? And I want to talk to you about the Grief Recovery Method program, which is a one-on-one program that we have a variety of grief recovery specialists on Guam that can actually do an online service, because I know people are still not comfortable with the first face-to-face. We can offer the program. It's an educational-based program, so it's not treatment. It's not, you know, again, we're not therapists, but it is a format for the griever and a person that can be the facilitator through what we call the grief recovery method, that teaches you tools along the way and how to work with some of the losses in your life that I had mentioned, the over 43 losses, and what you could do to start your healing and recovery journey. Now, many times people have asked the Institute, why do you use recovery? What is that? Like, how could grief and recovery be together in one sentence? And basically what recovery means, it just simply means feeling better. Recovery means feeling better and also restoring the quality of life that you lost when you went through some type of grief loss experience. I want to thank you all for your hard work, and I want to send you love and light, and we will open for questions at this time. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much for the great presentation. Very well detailed presentation on grief recovery. So far in the chat, there's no questions, but we have some really good feedback on the belief system, you turning it to the BS. They really like that, And then one of the comments is accepting grief is the first step in the process of healing. These are really good feedback on our chat. And aside from that, if you have anything other to add, I can close it out and say thank you for not only your work in the community, but everything you do for our branch and our prevention team. We really appreciate you for everything you do. And if there's nothing else, we're gonna give our attendees a break for the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elias.